Welcome back. I'm Stephanie Rule, updating you on the breaking news. We are learning brand new details from just released Judiciary Committee transcripts into that controversial June 2016 Trump Tower meeting between Trump campaign officials and a Russian lawyer. I want to broaden out this conversation and bring in former federal prosecutor Seth Waxman, along with my panel, A.B. Stoddard and Bill Cohen. Senator Chuck Grassley, a Republican, leads this committee. Seth, he wanted to release this, saying this thing is a nothing burger. And when I look at who a lot of the senators were who were in the room for the majority of this, they're Democrats. Why release this now? What's going on here?
Well, I think they're trying to continue their narrative that this is a nothing burger, just as you put it, that there's no collusion, that there's no conspiracy between the Russians on the one hand and the Trump campaign on the other. And maybe the evidence that they've collected does not prove up such a conspiracy. But as we all know, Bob Mueller runs a very different investigation with much different tools, wiretaps, search warrants for emails. And it's those documentary records that oftentimes in these kinds of cases really tell the real tale. So the fact that the Republicans put out there that this doesn't amount to much, to me, might be, the preview of a movie trailer that's not very good, and we're not seeing the full picture here. And it's not going to be until we see Bob Mueller's evidence that we really know whether there was this idea of a conspiracy to influence the 2016 election. In other words, an offer for dirt on Hillary Clinton in exchange for sanctions being reduced against the Russians, which is a classic quid pro quo that Bob Mueller could be using to indict or investigate a bribery scheme or other types of charges related. And I think that's what goes to the heart of Bob Mueller's investigation in this potential conspiracy.
All right. Well, tomorrow marks the one-year anniversary, Bill, of Bob Mueller's investigation. We know he's the guy who knows absolutely everything. But is releasing this a smart move for Republicans in that people across the country, not everyone, but people are growing tired of this. And they're saying, wake me up when you finally have the 10,000-pound gorilla. And if there's not the 10,000-pound gorilla in these transcripts, is that a win for Republicans, especially as we just had some primaries yesterday, as we look ahead to the midterms and Republicans are trying to figure out whether they're on Team Trump or not?
So Stephanie, I think it may be a short-term win for Republicans, like a day win. Going through 2,500 pages is a lot of work, takes a lot of time, takes up a lot of time on the airwaves. I mean, Chuck Grassley is a very crafty guy. Obviously, he knows that there's probably not much in here that would be considered a smoking gun, and that Bob Mueller has a very different investigation going on. So why not dominate the news through these 2,500 pages for a day or so? Get a little bit of a win, disrupt the Democratic narrative, and move on. And while we wait for Bob Mueller to, land the 10,000-pound gorilla.
But if there is nothing significant, does this hurt Bob Mueller's chance to be protected by Republicans if people are growing weary of
this? No, this is different. This is evidence that the congressional Republicans are continuing to work closely with the White House on what Rudy Giuliani, who's so wonderful because he's so open about this stuff, has now announced as a campaign on the anniversary of the start of this probe to basically blast it, quote unquote. And so they're all trying to do this, land sort of a nothing burger spin at the same time on the anniversary of the beginning of the probe. Bob Mueller is running a different investigation. Members of Congress know that. And they know that most of all of them have said Bob Mueller needs to continue to finish his job and unimpaired. And with the exception of, Devin Nunes and a few others who are trying to shut it down, they've all defended it, including Trey Gowdy, who's a significant voice as chairman of the Oversight Committee. They know it's a different investigation, and they know that people like Michael Caputo, an advisor on the campaign who has gone before the Mueller team, says things like they know more about the Trump campaign than anyone on the Trump campaign. It's different than sitting on the Senate committee. Because when you go in there, they have texts. They know what you did not only at 3 o'clock, but before and after, and it refreshes the memory. So this transcript of these interviews with Don Jr. really don't add up to much. It's good spin, Bill's right. It can make a few people say, wow, it sounds like a nothing burger. It's not going to last long when Mueller continues.
Bob Mueller, he knows what you did last summer. We just got this statement from Donald Trump Jr., quote, I appreciate the opportunity to have assisted the Judiciary Committee in its inquiry. The public can now see that for over 5 hours, I answered every question and was candid and forthright with the committee. I once again thank Chairman Grassley and Ranking Member Feinstein, as well as other members of the committee and their staff for their courtesy and professionalism. I just want to remind the audience again, Don Jr. answered, I don't remember, when asked if he spoke to his father President Donald Trump about the Russia investigation, so you can decide whether you believe that is or is not forthright. Seth, I want to ask you about the development around former Trump campaign chairman, or as Sean Spicer liked to call him, a short-term volunteer, Paul Manafort. A federal judge in D.C. denied his claim that special counsel Mueller's indictment of him for money laundering and other charges are exceeding his authority. What's that mean for Manafort?
Well, I think contrary to the Republicans issuing these statements about these transcripts, this is a federal judge here in Washington, D.C., who has provided a sweeping victory for the Mueller team. She has denied Manafort's motion to dismiss this indictment, and she did that on several grounds. She's a very well-respected judge here in Washington, D.C. She said first that the investigation and indictment fits squarely within Bob Mueller's mandate into Russian coordination with the Trump campaign. She said, based on that decision alone, or that basis alone, Mr. Manafort's motion to dismiss fails. But she went on and said, even if that weren't the case, this is a matter that arose out of that type of investigation, and then it should stand for that reason as well. And then finally, she said that a private citizen like Mr. Manafort does not have standing or the right to challenge internal DOJ or Department of Justice regulations. So even if he didn't have the first two grounds, really Mr. Manafort as a private citizen can't dig into and challenge the inner workings of the Department of Justice. So she really provided a sweeping victory to Mr. Mueller. And as we've heard across the river in the Eastern District of Virginia, a judge has taken a little bit of a different view and kind of off-the-cuff remarks he made. That's Judge Ellis. And one wonders whether this judge's decision here in D.C. will bleed into that second indictment against Mr. Manafort in Virginia. And when that Virginia judge issues his ruling, whether it will look a lot more like Judge Berman Jackson's ruling here in Washington, D.C.
Then quickly, before we go, because to your point, Judge Ellis seemed to be pretty tough on Mueller's team a week ago. Your last trial that you argued in 2016 as a federal prosecutor was before Amy Berman Jackson. Who is she? What is she like?
Well, as I mentioned, I did try my last case as a federal prosecutor in 2016 in front of the judge, and she is a very well-respected judge here in Washington, D.C. She is well thought out. She provides, very clear guidance in court and in her rulings, and I think the ruling she issued is right in line with that. She set out multiple bases for denying Mr. Manafort's motion, and on top of that, I think she made it essentially appellate-proof. In other words, that she hasn't really left any ground for Mr. Manafort to go to the D.C. Circuit, which is the court that sits above the trial court level, to say this judge got it wrong. And so I think, consistent with my experience with Judge Jackson, she has issued a well-thought-out opinion that really grants, as I said, Mr. Mueller's team a sweeping victory.